Uh, Sherrard Shekeese Duvall is a film producer, media educator, and an ambassador of South Carolina hip hop culture. Shekeese was a former DJ for Columbia's Big DM, Hot 103.9 FM, and several radio stations along the East Coast. He's produced commercial and documentary projects for various networks, including VH1 and Oxygen Network. As a product of Richland District 1 schools, Sherrard is a 2001 University of South Carolina graduate and is now the president and CEO of OTR Media Group. We are excited to have Shekeese share the story of his familial ties to Columbia, including the Wheeler Hill neighborhood. And with that, I turn today's program over to Shekeese.
All right, can you all hear me? Super great. Thank you so much for that great intro, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for everybody that is joining us today. I see a lot of family, see some friends and some colleagues that are here with us. I'm super excited about what we're going to talk about today. Columbia means a lot to me, and I think through this presentation, we will see why Columbia means so much to me. So I'm going to go ahead and get my screen sharing going, Rachel. And I do also have a soundtrack for this presentation, which should be a lot of fun for my family that's here. And the reason why I have the soundtrack for this presentation is often when I'm working in the TV and film world, whenever I am a part of projects that are about the South, particularly the South of the past between the years of 1920 and anywhere up to the present, I'm often pushing against the music soundtrack whenever the South is portrayed, particularly the Black South, because I often feel like the music is misrepresented. You know, in Ridgewood, where I grew up, which I'll talk about today, in the neighborhood before I was born and even after I was born, I can tell you right now, we did not hear a lot of twangy guitar playing in the neighborhood. It mostly sounded like James Brown and Curtis Mayfield and the Isaac Brothers and Nat King Cole, and that's the music that was around in South Carolina and the Black South particularly. So I thought that was appropriate for the presentation today. So let's get into my talk today, which is straight out of Ridgewood. So like Rachel and has already mentioned, I am from Columbia, South Carolina. I'm a TV and film producer, media educator, and ambassador of South Carolina hip hop culture. Many know me as a former DJ for Hot 103.9, Big DM, as well as I've made appearances on BET and MTV. Since 2006, I've been working as a filmmaker and producer, working on various projects. However, none of what I've accomplished in my life, whether you're talking about me graduating from the University of South Carolina, or the work that I've done at OTR Media Group, would not be possible without a very unique upbringing that I had here in Columbia, South Carolina. Now, before I really get into that, I want to dedicate this presentation to my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, Susie and Augustus, and what we like to usually call the children of Susie and Augustus, the Ridgewood 13, but I'm going to alter that a little bit if I do have any family here, to call that the Ridgewood 14, because technically my great-grandparents had 14 children, one of which passed away in 1919, which was Lane. But I want to dedicate this presentation to Susie and Augustus, my great-grandparents, as well as my uncles and aunties, Arthur, Susie, Beatrice, Gussie. It's funny for me to say their first names without saying uncle in front of it. So I'm gonna say Uncle Edward, Uncle Bud, Aunt Etha, Aunt Alice, Uncle Luke, who we call Uncle Bay, Uncle William, who we call Uncle Bill, my grandfather, Joseph Nathaniel Duvall, my Aunt Colin, my Aunt Lorraine, and my Uncle Jimmy Duvall, whose real name is James. And so you see some pictures here of my family, but let's just jump right into it. I've already talked about myself, so I'm gonna split this side and I'm gonna get right over to Ridgewood. And so, like I said before, what many may know that on this call, that I graduated high school from Columbia High School. but I did not move to Broad River Road until 1990. During my 7th grade year of middle school is when I started to get bused from Hyde Park Elementary School to St. Andrews Middle School. I attended elementary school at Hyde Park Elementary School. And fun fact, I skipped 2nd and 3rd grade. I want to give a shout out to Mrs. Frazier and Mrs. Britt and Principal Lily White. We had super black teachers at Hyde Park back in the day, and they were really excited about young black kids who would learn. And that's how I moved through elementary school relatively quickly. But I grew up in a neighborhood off of Monticello Road, right behind Eau Claire High School, and behind the Piggly Wiggly, across the street from Mr. Brown's Seafood, known as Ridgewood. So what you see here in the picture is some of, in the presentation, of some of the memories that I have from Ridgewood. On the left, you see 728 Summit Avenue, which is the house below, which I'll talk a little bit about more throughout the presentation. Above that is a picture of Mr. Brown's Seafood. Anybody that knows anything about Ridgewood, particularly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, know all about Mr. Brown's. And you've probably seen me up there several times, either with my Uncle D or for my grandma, or picking up food for Miss Minnie Lee or something like that, Mr. Brown's. And then the infamous Piggly Wiggly, which is right up the street on Summit Avenue, is where I had to go and buy everything from Pepsi to cigarettes back then. They let kids buy cigarettes back then. When I was a kid, you take the change, you walk to the store up the street, and go to the Piggly Wiggly, and boom. And so these are just some of the images that represent Ridgewood to me. So when I talk about Ridgewood in this presentation, I'm specifically talking about the area from about uh, from about from Eau Claire High School all the way over to about somewhere around the end of where you see Ridgewood Park Community Center on this map that you all see here. From Crest to Elliott Street, Elliott Avenue, which is right there next to Eau Claire, and from Monticello Road to Julius Dixon Lane was the area that I called home and that I knew was Ridgewood. Now, there's two important arrows that you see on this presentation right here that are important to point out, and that is the arrow that's pointing to 728 Summit Avenue and the arrow that's pointing to 904 Summit Avenue. Now, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about 904 and 728, so make sure you keep those in mind. But this is the specific area that I'm talking about when I talk about Ridgewood. I rarely, when I was a kid, went further than the candy store arcade, which was really somewhere over here where you see this empty lot here. Mr. Brown's Seafood was somewhere over here. This is the Piggly Wiggly here. And then the mosque is still here. Many of you all remember the mosque in the neighborhood. There was a laundromat right here, which I think is still a laundromat to this day, right here on Monticello. And this is where I spent the bulk of my childhood. Now, I will say I had a tremendously huge family, which I'll get to in just a minute. So I did spend a lot of time further down Monticello at Hyde Park, which is the park where I played t-ball and baseball when I was a kid. So I did leave this area occasionally, but that was about as far as I would go, probably until we moved from Ridgewood in 1989, 1990, my 7th grade year of middle school. And so this is the Ridgewood that I'm talking about specifically. So I know a lot of people know that Ridgewood also extends on the other side of Monticello. It also extends here down by the paint and body shop down here. But this is not the part of Ridgewood I grew up in. I'm specifically referring to this area that you see the majority of this circle around right here. That's what I grew up in as Ridgewood. So that's going to be the center of our presentation today. Okay, so I found out about the Jubilee celebration of Black Columbia African American arts and culture right around 2013. And when I first started working with Historic Columbia, I found out about Jubilee while volunteering and doing some work when I was at the Nickelodeon Theater as a director of media education. And while I was there, what I learned about Jubilee really kind of struck me. And here's some pictures of some early Jubilee festivals from back in the 70s. And there's a picture there from 1986. Now, I did not know until 2013 when I started volunteering for Jubilee that the festival was started in 1978, which ironically is the year that I was born. And Colombians, Black Colombians specifically, have gathered on the grounds of the Man Simon site at the corner of Richland and Marion Street to celebrate African American culture, cuisine, and creativity. I could not believe that I was unaware that this festival had been going on for so long. And the whole time this festival was celebrating Colombia native Black folk just like me. And so I thought to myself, I'm from Colombia. I have a deep connection to being Black and in Colombia. It's super important to me and the man and the person that I've become over the years. And that village that I refer to as Ridgewood is really what made Shekeese and Shekeese Duvall the person that he is today, essential to my existence. So without my Black Columbia experience, I certainly would not be the person that I am today. And I am attached to Jubilee Festival for that reason. Me being any part of anything Jubilee has going on is because of the strong lineage that I have here in Colombia. And I honor the legacy of my family and my great-grandparents by being a part of this festival every year. All right, so my family, the Duvall family, which is on my mother's side, my mother's name is Debbie Duvall, came to Colombia shortly after emancipation by way of my grandfather's parents, Augustus and Susie, who I mentioned earlier. Augustus and Susie Duvall, or Davall, we'll get into that a little bit later in the Q&A, depending on who you ask. They were in Colombia as early as 1910 is the earliest census records we have of them in Columbia, South Carolina. They first were living at a place close to the downtown Columbia at 517 Marion Street before moving to 904 Summit Avenue in Ridgewood. By the time that they moved, by the time they were in Marion Street, they already had 4 kids. And then by the time you get to their showing up in the census in 1930 was when you see that they have 10 kids. So here's a picture of 904 Summit Avenue. This is a picture after the home was actually abandoned. So this picture must have been taken somewhere around 1978 or 79 because the home burned down the year that I was born. I think that was 77 or 78. And here are some pictures of some of the first kids of kids to come out of the Susie and Augustus legacy. One of their children, of course, was Edward, my Uncle Bud. And here are some pictures of Bud's kids, really small. It's my Aunt Edna there. It's my Uncle Tony right here. And this is my Uncle Eugene here. Here's some more pictures of them in front of 904 here behind you. 904 was the central family home for my family because of Susie and Augustus's the amount of kids that they had. They had 13 children. And so here is an excerpt from the 1910 census, which is over here, where you can see in 1910, this is Gustav, which is Augustus. Davall is spelled here. Now, I'm gonna just warn you, and you're probably already picking up, you're gonna see a lot of different spellings of our name. Now, we'll get to that in the Q&A. There's a lot of reasons why African Americans, our names shift on documents in the past. So if you see above, my great-grandfather Augustus was a waiter there, and see here his wife Susie. He worked at the Jefferson Hotel. Here's a part of his obituary here, and this is was the Jefferson Hotel at the time. Here you see his wife Susie Duvall, but you see it here spelled D-A-V-A-U-L-T, but over here it's spelled D-A-V-O-L-L. Here in the phone book that we found is listed as D-A-V-A-U-L-T, but it's the same dude. So they were working class people. My great grandfather Augustus was a waiter at the Jefferson Hotel. My great grandmother Susie worked as a washerwoman and a maid for white families in Columbia. Now, many of you might be thinking, well, how in the world did a waiter and a washerwoman that worked for white folks, cleaning white folks' houses. How were they able to take care of 13 kids? Well, a lot of that had to do with what in the Black community at that time, back in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, was called cooperative economics. Before I get into a little bit more about the neighborhood, I want to talk a little bit more about what you see in the 1930 census, which is listed here. And this is where you start to really see the 13 start to come into existence. This is my great-grandfather Augustus, his wife Susie. That's my Aunt Gussie. This is my Aunt Sally, also known as B or Beatrice. This is my Aunt Etha, my Uncle Edward, who we call Uncle Bud, Uncle Luke, who we call Uncle Bay. That's my Aunt Alice. William is who we call my Uncle Bill. This is my Aunt Colin, and that's my grandfather Joe, who I always call Joseph Nathaniel. And then right here is my Aunt Lorraine. Now, when I was talking about cooperative economics in Columbia, South Carolina, in Ridgewood, the neighborhood I grew up in, it's really, you really have to picture this, because on one hand, African Americans that lived at that time lived in segregated communities, so they had to be self-sufficient. On the other hand, that self-sufficiency not only created a strong sense of community, but it also created a strong sense of pride in doing for self. I mean, almost everything in the neighborhood at that time was made, created, designed, cooked, or worked on by somebody Black and somebody that you knew. And there were cabinet builders in Ridgewood at that time. There were social clubs like Silver Star, chain gangs that would work to smooth out the dirt roads, because there were no paved roads in Ridgewood. They were all dirt roads. There were community churches like St. Paul Baptist Church, which is the church I grew up in, but they were also neighborhood churches, like the church that Miss Lean had and my family would tell me so much about. That was just a house church in the neighborhood. There were 5 and dime stores. There were general stores. There was the Walter Hill and Davis barbecue. There were juke joints that my grandfather and some of his brothers used to visit. Salons and barbershops and mechanics and meat barns and brick masons and swimming holes and the Ridgewood baseball team and even the Ridgewood school, which almost all of my family members, not only the ones that you see listed in the census, but their children, some of which are on the call today, my Uncle Keith, my Aunt Edna, my Uncle Tony, they walked to Ridgewood School. And here's a picture of Ridgewood School here, which was in the neighborhood. This school here is no longer there. It's now the location of Ridgewood Park. I'll go back to the map later so you can see exactly on the map when you're looking at Ridgewood where that is. But this is the Ridgewood School. This is a picture of it in 1949, but the Ridgewood School was built in that Black community in 1922. Down here is a picture of one of the Negro Little League teams. And if you look closer, you'll notice the name Shekeese Duvall is one of my uncles. Eugene is pictured right over here. That's my Uncle Gino as a little kid in the Simpkins League, which is what he played for. So this neighborhood, the neighborhood at that time was more like a community than like the neighborhoods that we know of today. Not only did almost everybody, including my own great-grandparents and then subsequently their kids, have gardens, several of the neighbors would have maybe farm animals. Some people would have meat. And so they would share food, they would share meals, we would share things out of our garden with other neighbors. And that's just how these communities were able to have all these children, yet everyone never go hungry, never do without, never have to worry about being alone or not having anybody to play with. It was a very vibrant, sharing community. And even the stores in the neighborhood at that time, many of them worked on credit. And so even if you didn't have the money to actually pay for your food or your clothes that you had to have made, or if you had to pick up some meat, you could get credit because the person that ran the shop knew the family and would give you credit until you could pay your bill. And so the Ridgewood neighborhood, very early on for my family, started out as a very close-knit community. So while we did have my Duvall and Duvall ancestors there, I'll talk a little bit later about many of the families that kind of came together to make family for us. And so I want to share a few more pictures with you all about Ridgewood up above. That's my Aunt Ether right there with her family here. I mean, the hairstyles back then were off the chain. I still don't understand how these. I ask my aunties and uncles all the time, how are y'all so poor but y'all look so fly all the time? I never understood it, but I certainly understood where I got my fashion sense from, because if you look over to my left, that's my Aunt Gussie right here. This is one of my favorite pictures of my Aunt Gussie. I have two favorites of her. This is one of them. If you look at those shoes and that coat with that fur and that hat, I mean, I don't even know what to tell you. That's just fashion to a T. My Aunt Colin used to have this saying. She used to say, saying a taste. Them clothes, girl, you saying a taste. It was a saying that she used to say, and that's what she would say about that picture right there. Here's another picture of my uncle Eugene from high school here. He went to C.A. Johnson High School. And then here's a picture of some of the original 13 kids. There's my Uncle Bill there. It's my Uncle Jimmy. That's my grandfather Joe there. This is my Uncle Bay. This is my Uncle Bill. Wait, I got these mixed up. This is Bill. This is Bay, right? Somebody correct me. I might have got this one wrong, but that looked like Bill because I thought Bill was taller than Bay. And this is Aunt Colin right here. This is Lorraine right here, and Gussie right here. So it's more of my family from Ridgewood. Here are a few more pictures. Now, I wanted to show these set of pictures because one of the things that's important to remember is that history is living history. And we hear a lot of stories about how Black communities and Black families fled the South due to terrorism and oppression. My family was a part of that. There was a lot of exodus in my family between about 1936, after my great-grandfather Augustus passed, until about 1985. I mean, even granted, my Uncle Keith and my Uncle Gerald didn't go up north, but they certainly went to Georgia, went to Atlanta and left Columbia. But my Uncle Book was one of the first to leave for Virginia soon after my Aunt B and Lorraine left too. My Aunt Alice, my Uncle Bay, my Uncle Bill, my Uncle Gino used to visit Bay and Bill in Virginia. My Aunt Susie to Philadelphia. My Aunt Colin and Aunt Gussie also were up north with family for a while. And a lot of that was due to them trying to not just get opportunity, because there was more opportunity up north for Black folk, but also to escape terrorism and oppression. At this time in Black history, even here in Columbia, South Carolina, it was a very violent time to be African American. And so a lot of my uncles and great aunts and uncles left Columbia as soon as they graduated high school, as soon as they can. And you can see my Uncle Bay here, also here. I believe this is my Aunt Ether here. This is an early picture of my Aunt Alice. So they would send pictures back home when they moved or when they got up north. And these are some of those pictures, early pictures that they took when they made their way up north. So let's get closer, a little bit closer to me. And I am a result of certainly these two people that you see on screen. I think it's important to remember that 904 7th Avenue remained even when a lot of the family moved away. Somewhere around the mid 1950s, a family of mostly girls moved into the Ridgewood neighborhood with the last name Chin. It was about 7 brothers and sisters, one of which was named Claire May Chin. If you look up to the left, here is a high school picture of my grandmother, Claire May Chin, in high school at C.A. Johnson High School is where she went. Fun fact, most of my family either went to C.A. Johnson High School, Booker T. Washington High School, which is where Edna, Tony, and my grandfather went, and then Eau Claire High School once Eau Claire became segregated, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Here's an early picture of my grandfather, Joseph Nathaniel, with my grandfather. We call him D, Jose. He's blind. He was already blind here in this picture. He was blind at 3 years old. And this is my grandfather Joe's sister, Colin, right here. And then here's a picture of my grandfather and grandmother here. for the remainder of this, you'll hear me refer to them as Claire May Joe, because that's how the neighborhood referred to them as a whole. It was never Claire May or Joe or Champ, like they call my grandfather. It was always Claire May Joe. It was one word. And so so you'll hear me refer to them as Claire May Joe throughout this presentation. And so my grandfather and my grandmother met somewhere around 1952. They had my Aunt Janice, who was the first of 8 kids in 1953. I'm sorry, yes, in 1953, and then they got married in 1954. My grandfather inherited the 904 family home, and my family just got bigger in Ridgewood because of their union, because my grandmother's family moved to Ridgewood. Now, in addition to me having the Duvall and Duvall family to look forward to meeting in just a few years, I now had an extended family of Chins and then Chandlers, which is how I'm connected to that family. So with my grandmother Claire May came my great-grandparents Blanche and William, which is my grandmother's parents, and then her siblings, my Aunt Edna, my Aunt Ella Marie Watkins, my Aunt Ruth, my Uncle Thomas, my Aunt Mary, and my Uncle John. And yes, my grandfather and grandmother met in Ridgewood and then ended up living together in Ridgewood. And so, as you can imagine, my great-grandparents having 13 kids, then then their kids, from Uncle Bud to my grandfather Joe, the ones that stayed having a whole bunch of kids. It was like an army of children in Ridgewood. And so you'll see the family continue to grow as I go further in the years here with the photos. And then there's one other quick note. My grandfather managed a barbershop downtown in Columbia on Hardman Street, but he also had a barbershop in the neighborhood as well. And here's an image from the collegiate barbershop that he managed, 1519 and a half Hardman Street. If you ever heard of the NAACP or people like I.D. Quincy Newman, my grandfather used to cut their hair at this barbershop. Is where a lot of those guys would come and have conversations, like most Black barbershops to this day. And my grandfather was the barber for a lot of those famous folks that we know about in Columbia, South Carolina, because of his location at that barbershop downtown. So the home, 904 Summit Avenue, remained central for my family. So many family members were either born at or near that house. Not just my aunts and uncles, Janice and my Uncle Deed and Gary and my Aunt Vicky and my mom, my Uncle Gerald, and eventually my Aunt Tanya, but several of the original 13 kids were born in this house. Whether you're talking about my Aunt Alice, that came, the Hill family came from her with Helen and Joan, or you're talking about my Uncle Bud with Tony, Eugene, Edna, Al, and Keith, or my Aunt Etha, which came my Aunt Dot, and then Theodore, Robert, Norman, and Storm and Norman, I call them, rest in peace, and Edith, my Uncle Jimmy, who ended up having Larry and Stefan and Terry. My Aunt Colin had my Uncle Curtis, not to mention all of the neighborhood families like the Max and the Washingtons and Miss Minnie Lee, and so many families back then. So what you see here is that original picture of 904. Here's another picture of some of the family that moved up to New York. This right here is my Aunt Beverly, rest in peace. Is my Aunt Sandra there, and more family here. Over here is an amazing picture of one of the last times the family was at 904 Summit Avenue. And you can see younger versions of, well, you all don't know there's younger versions, but these are younger versions of a lot of the people that I know. This picture was taken 1 year before I was born in 1977. Here's a picture of my Aunt Janice here. My mother is right here. It's my Aunt Colin here. It's my Uncle Gary here. I mean, so many family members. There's Dee, and there's my grandmother right over there. There's my grandfather there. I mean, I could go on and on, but 904 Summit Avenue for the family was like ground zero. And so even when the family would move to New York or Virginia or Philadelphia, every summer, and then sometimes even on the holidays, family would descend. So it never really felt like those family members were not around, because family was all around. So in addition to just family that was in town, you had extended family that would come to town so often that, to be honest with you, our family was so large that it really felt like you didn't really know where the family bloodline began and ended. And this is one of the reasons why, because families were so close like mine in this neighborhood, Ridgewood, that I'm talking about, this is the reason why African Americans continued on the tradition of our West African and Central African ancestors by not delineating between whether or not someone was related to you or not via blood, right? A lot of the people that I call my uncle, like my Uncle Keith or my Uncle Marty, aren't technically blood my uncle, but because we carried on those same traditions from West Africa and Central Africa, we really respected our elders. So anybody that was older than you was either going to be an uncle or auntie. Anybody that was your age would be a cousin. So my grandmother would have this line, and she would also say, you only play with your cousins. I don't play with my uncles and aunties. So uncles and aunties were uncles and aunties, cousins were cousins. That's just how it went. So the blood connection didn't matter as much as the familial connection did, if that makes any sense. And it's still that way to this day. I still refer to a lot of my uncles and aunties as uncles and aunties, even though they're not technically my mom's brother or sister. That's just how we were raised. And so in 1976 is when the family moved to 728 Summit Avenue, which is the home you see right here. And in 1978 was the year that I was born. 728 Summit Avenue ended up becoming like the new 728 Summit Avenue became like the new ground zero for my family. And so here are some early pictures of me at 728 Summit Avenue. There's me with my mom. This is my cousin Ebony back there in the back. Oh wait, I didn't want to leave that picture just yet. Hold on. Because I wanted to talk about me in this amazing outfit right here. Now, people trip on the fact that I'm very fashionable, and I still am to this day, is because it's born in my DNA. If you seen my Aunt Gussie earlier, there are also some pictures of my Uncle Bay and my Uncle Bill. We was just always a fashionable family, and somehow I had that earlier. This picture right here was taken when I was 6 years old, and I don't know what made me hit that pose on the tree. I know it wasn't inspired by anybody but myself. And so I just wanted to show off 6-year-old Shekeese Duvall for y'all real quick. So it's difficult for me to express what it was like, life was like for me in Ridgewood growing up at that time. It kind of was like a movie. At 728 Summit Avenue, it was 13 of us in a 1-bedroom home with 1 bathroom. It was me, my Uncle Gary, my Uncle Gerald, my Uncle D. In the back room was where the boys were. And then in the front room is where the girls were. My Aunt Tanya, my Aunt Janice, my Aunt Vicky, my sister Shavonta were in the front room. And then my grandmother and grandfather lived in the middle room. And there was always family at our house at 728. After 904 got burned down, 728 Summit Avenue kind of became ground zero for our family, just like 904 was. So whenever family came to town, or cousins came to town, or cousins needed someplace to stay, I always tell people my grandmother's house was like Grand Central Station. So it was always another 1 or 2 families living in the living room, or 1 or 2 families living in the dining room. That's how I'm so close today with several of my cousins, and some of whom you see in the picture here. So this is another one of the infamous houses that was in Ridgewood. This is my Uncle Bud's house, which is where my Uncle Keith and Tony and Edna and Al, this is where they grew up here. Here's a picture of my grandmother in the 728 Summit Avenue home. I'm not sure when this picture was taken. And here's another picture of me as a kid in front of 728 Summit Avenue, my Aunt Tanya, and there's my cousin Brandon there. One of the things that my family is big on is family reunions. So this is one of our big family reunions here that we had in Newport News, Virginia. And you can see on the shirt, it says Duvall, not Duval. Don't worry, we'll get to that in the Q&A. If y'all have more questions about that, we'll get to that. And then up here, I had to put this picture of my cousin Ebony and then my late sister Shavonta, who passed away several years ago. Was my older sister by 4 years. And this reminds me of what it was like to grow up in Ridgewood. It was lots of family. I was in and out of lots of houses all the time. It was a really interesting time to grow up because either I was around a pack of cousins, or I was around a pack of friends, or around a bunch of families like the Jacobs family who lived across the street for us, or I was down the street at my Aunt Miriam's house with the Davis family, or I'd be on the Chandler, maybe my Aunt Phyllis porch playing with my cousin Mandel, God bless the dead. On any given afternoon, I might be at my Aunt Gloria's house in the refrigerator, or at Miss Minnie Lee's house, getting in trouble with some of my neighborhood friends like Atari and Manya. It was a really wild time, and it's really hard to explain to someone that never experienced what it's like to grow up in a village. It was so many cousins and so many of us, and we were so close at all the time. Even our friends of our parents and friends of ours got kind of melded into family. So I have friends of my mom, like my mom had friends like her friend Brenda, and who had sons like Mario and Keon, that I called my cousin, even though they weren't really my cousin, because it was just so many of us. And we all lived in that little enclave around Summit Avenue, but between Crest and Julius Dixon. So we were just all in the same area. And so it was just a really, really, really beautiful and wild time. We walked to Hyde Park in packs, or up to the candy store or grocery store in groups. We ran through graveyards trying to get to my aunt Gloria's house, or my friend Coy's house. And yes, we did a lot of breaking and entering and fighting too. I was a little crybaby as a kid, and so I was usually on the getting beat up side of most fights. But it truly, truly was growing up like a village. So here, as I get towards the end, get towards the Q&A portion of our talk today, I want to share a few more pictures from my family, from the Ridgewood, my Ridgewood family. Above on the left, that's my Aunt Beverly, God bless the dead. There's my Aunt Edna, my Uncle Jimmy, rest in peace as well. There's my cousin Shara, there's my Aunt Sandra up there. If you look to the right, I love this picture here because this is my aunt here, Dot, who, if you look below, these are some of her great grandkids down here. There's my cousin Tisha and Trina, and these are the Davises right here. And then over here is another meld of whether you're talking about Edith Hill, and there's my Aunt Connie, and there's Sandra again, and there's my Aunt Janice, and there's my Aunt Kat. That was my Uncle Jimmy's wife. That are here. Look at Curtis back there in the back. The Green family. I can't forget the Green family. I almost did. And then right here, you have some of the family from New York. Again, our New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Virginia family would come. It was always mixed. So you find photos of people that live in different places together all of the time because the family was so close knit. And some of the things that we did musically, I think is important for me to point out, because I know a lot of people know me as Shekeese Duvall and a musician. That mostly came from my Uncle D. My Uncle D was blind, but my grandfather played piano. My Uncle Gerald played guitar. My Uncle Larry played guitar. If you see right here, this picture right here is, we're doing the electric slide in 728 Summit Avenue, and this is the same day as a funeral, because that's just how my family, that it was super joyous, and it was filled with a lot of fun. Sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. And that's just kind of how it was. So over here, more of my aunties from up north. There's my Aunt Cora right there. We call her Cookie. It's my Aunt Edna again. There's Beverly again. Down here is more recent pictures of my Uncle Keith, my Uncle Eugene, my Aunt Edna, my Uncle Tony, my Uncle Al. Here's an older picture of my mother with some dude she was dating. I know she don't want me to show this picture, but I love that picture because my Aunt Vicky, look how cute my Aunt Vicky look right there. That's my mom's sister. And there's my sister Shavonta right there. And there's Tisha and Trina, my little cousin Shelly down there. Here's another picture of the family with my Uncle Jimmy and my Aunt Kat before they passed away as well. So that's a little bit about growing up in Ridgewood. I think that it's very important whenever you're looking at history and whenever you're interacting with people on a day-to-day basis to know that you're interacting with living history. Whenever you're interacting with Shekeese Duvall, you're interacting with 100 years of African-American history here in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm just the latest version of Susie and Augustus. I'm just the latest version of Joe and Alice and Etha and all of those that came before me. History isn't something that's trapped in the past. As we walk every day, we're only the 2.0 or 3.0 versions of a long line of ancestors that have come here before us. And myself having 100-year history here in Columbia, South Carolina, with my great-grandparents coming to Columbia early in the early 1900s, 1910, 1907, somewhere around that time. I am a native Colombian and proud to be a native Colombian, proud to be a member of the Duvall tribe, part of the Ridgewood tribe of families. And it is incredibly important that we not forget and we continue to celebrate our culture. This is why Jubilee Festival is so important to me, is that I get a chance to not only represent my family lineage when I'm there, I also get a chance to protect that history of Ridgewood, of Augustus and Susie, of the sacrifices that my family made and took so that we can enjoy the life that we enjoy today. And so thank y'all. I'm going to stop sharing now, Rachel. I know we got a Q&A. I'm running a little bit long. But I'm trying to be mindful of time. That's why I'm speeding up towards the end. So I'm going to stop this here. Yeah, that's right, Gail. I'm just now seeing this chat.
Well, thank you so much, Shekeese, for sharing all of those images and all of those stories and memories. We are really appreciative and we enjoyed hearing about your family. We at HC also just really want to thank you for all the work that you do with Jubilee. And it was very touching to hear what Jubilee means to you and seeing some of the reactions from your family in the comments. It was very great. If anybody has any last minute questions that you can put into the chat, please go ahead. But to kick it off, I have a quick question.
Sure.
As, you did an amazing job sharing so much about yourself, your family, all of those stories, finding all of those photographs. And we're so happy so many of your family was able to tune in today. So do you mind sharing a little bit about how you went about doing this research and kind of giving a little bit of ideas for people who want to do this research themselves, specifically here in Colombia?
Yes. So first, I got to give a shout out to my cousin, James Kennedy up in New York, who I'm sure is going to be watching a replay of this, because most of the census materials that I've gotten, most of the old pictures of my grandmother or grandfather or great grandparents that I've gotten, or their children, I got from his work. He's been building an Ancestry.com family tree for our family for probably about, I don't know, maybe 15, 16 years. And so a lot of the material that he gets is either from the census. He spends a lot of time working with Richland Library, Richland Library has archives from all of the high schools in Colombia, which is where a lot of the pictures come from. My grandmother and my uncle Tony and my uncle Eugene, high school pictures. I have plenty more. I just didn't have enough time to get them all in. Another great place to find archive material is the South Carolina State Museum as well. I got to give a shout out to Dr. Bobby Donaldson, who has the University of South Carolina Civil Rights Center. And they do a phenomenal job. As a matter of fact, several of not only the images that I get from Dr. Donaldson, but the image of my grandfather as a manager at the barbershop, Bobby Donaldson sent me that one as well. And so those are some of the places, particularly if you're into African-American history, but the Richland County, the Richland Library Archives also has a lot of history about whether you're from a white community or a Black community and tied to Columbia, South Carolina. So those are some of the places where you can, that I used, some of the people that helped me, and some of the things that I think the public can use to find their more about their family history here in Columbia. You muted.
Thank you so much. We have two more questions if you don't mind.
I don't mind. We got a little bit of time,
one of which, right? We got time. Some people wanted a little bit more information about the Wheeler Hill connection to Ridgewood. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
I do not. I stayed away from that because I could not find exactly when my great-grandparents left the Marion Street area. And the 517 Marion Street area that they were at is no longer, it doesn't exist anymore. Like most of Wheeler Hill and Ward 1, all of these places are close to wherever you see USC now, from about, I say about the Horseshoe all the way down to Williams-Brice Stadium. Almost all of that was what Columbia used to call Black Bottom back in the day. And I couldn't find exactly where the connection to Willow Hill Stockton started, but I can tell you that prior to the 1950s, which is really when a lot of the redlining and blight started in Columbia, South Carolina, when most of the neighborhoods that we know as Black neighborhoods today were created because of the displacement of Willow Hill and Ward 1 communities. So places like Haskell Heights and Greenview, even as Ridgewood continued to grow, many of those folks came from that area. However, my great-grandparents were from earlier. So you're talking about 1908, 1907, 1909, 1910. And so I wasn't 100% sure if they were displaced because of the University of South Carolina, or if they moved to Ridgewood on their own. And so that's why I left most of about Willow Hill out of the presentation today. I see my Uncle Keith.
Our last question, we got it from a couple different people. You mentioned in your presentation the name change, last name name change. Do you mind reflecting a little bit about that, explaining that a little bit more?
Actually, can we unmute my Uncle Keith? I'm gonna put him on the spot since he's here. And until y'all can do that, I'll kind of get started until y'all get him to talk. So I'll say the general part, Keith, and then I'll let you say the more interesting part. So part of the reason why we have no idea what our last name is several more common sense reasons. Meaning, back during the time that they took census or death certificates or birth certificates, particularly between prior to about 1960. A lot of that information was taken verbally. And unfortunately, we were living in a society that was very racist and prejudiced. They didn't particularly care to ask what the spelling of a name was. And so part of the reason is because that information was taken verbally most times, and because they didn't care to ask, nor sort out whether or not the accent of what that person was asking. That's why we have maybe 4 or 5 different spellings of our last name. You see it as D-A-V-A-U-L-T, you see it as D-A-V-O-L-L, you see it as D-U-V-A-L-L. And on all same person, several different documents, whole different spellings of names. Like, it's very, 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 oh, my aunt is on the phone. I'm sorry, I saw a text come through. Now, there's also a very interesting story that I'm gonna let my Uncle Keith share about why we also believe that we have the Duvall-Dayval name separation in our family. Do you want to speak on that briefly?
Talk about being put on the spot. You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. You sound good.
First of all, nephew, cuz few, like as we call each other, did a great job, man. It really touched my heart. Appreciate that. Well, I'm just speaking directly. I'm quoting Uncle Bill, who left in a hurry to get back to go from South Carolina to New York because I guess he had a run-in with the law. And he always told us that, I think our name originally, I always thought it was D-U-V-A-L-L until I saw your document there that says Gusta D-A-V-O-L-L. But Uncle Bill was a very strong-minded uncle. You can even call him militant at the time. But, he said, well, I didn't want to take on, as he quoted, the white man's last name. So he changed. And my dad's name changed from D-U-V-A-L-L to D-A-V-O-L-L when they filled out documents. So I don't know if that was true based on your document. It looks like it was that before that happened. I'm not sure.
We don't know.
That's a story I was told, and I kind of stuck with that for a long time.
That's a story I was told too. And it's interesting because my grandfather, Joseph, is the only one that has the D-U-V-A-L-L name. The rest of his brothers and sisters all have D-A-V-O-L-L, but they're all brothers and they're all family. Yeah, it wasn't like a beef. It wasn't a family beef or anything like that. It was nothing like that. It was either no one cared to get it right, or my Uncle Bill got into trouble with the law, had all his brothers and sisters change their name except for my Uncle Joe, and boom. So one of them stories is true. we don't know which one it is. Thank you, Unc.
Appreciate it, man. Enjoyed it big time.
Thank you. Aunt Edna's on the phone too somewhere. I don't see her up here, but I know she's somewhere around here. I see my uncle. I see Tony on here too. Hey, Aunt Deb, I see you too. I see my mom too. Rachel, you better pop in before I start turning this into a family reunion. Because I
think
going.
that's totally called for now. Well, we want to thank everybody for attending today's program. We definitely want to thank Shekeese for presenting today. And thanks to the entire Duvall family for joining us. We are very happy to provide presentations like this for free of charge, but we are very appreciative of any monetary donations that you all are able to make. We have a chat message going out right now, and we also have a QR code on the screen, but this is also available through our website. Stay tuned also on our website for our events page, and you can subscribe to our newsletter to get information on upcoming segments in the Knowledge at Noon series, including those presentation topics and upcoming speakers. Our next Knowledge at Noon presentation will be on October 2nd. We will have historic archaeologist Dr. Kelly Goldberg discuss recent investigations into heritage memorialization with excavations of late 19th, early 20th century tenant farming communities at the Sesquicentennial State Park in Columbia. You will receive a post-event email later today with the recording of this program and a link to sign up for next month's Knowledge at Noon. Again, if you came into the program and did not pre-register, please email reservations@historiccolumbia.org if you will like a copy of today's presentation. But again, thank you so much, Shekeese. Thank you so much, everybody who tuned in today. We want to thank you one more time for attending the program, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.